Hello and good afternoon. Thank you so much for tuning in to me again. I'm sorry I've been away for about a month, and that was because I was aggressed in front of my front door on the 5th of April at 10:30 in the evening. I was knocked out unconscious for a couple of hours, and I had a huge black eye and my face was really horrible. So I was not going to impose that on my viewers. So I'm alive and kicking. I've obviously done all the necessary things with the authorities and the doctor and everything else. So I'm here and I'm going to continue on the subject of our origins, which is a very fascinating subject indeed. And before I go straight in, I would like to draw your attention to a news item on REDACTED, which is an alternative news channel which I follow closely, and I really like to say a big thank you to Natalie and Clayton Morris and their team, for the wonderful work they do. Now, I've put the link to this particular article and interview in the description because it's an interview with a gentleman who was in the company of extraterrestrials as a child. It's an experience and not an abduction because there's no invasive procedures whatsoever, except obviously for being invited aboard without necessarily consenting. He was only 8 or 9 at the time. And he describes his experience with these beings who, by all accounts, were tall greys. So people who are familiar with the taxonomy of ETs know what I'm talking about. And for those of you who are new to this, these are relatively benign creatures who aren't particularly aesthetic to look at. They have big round heads with big dark eyes and very thin spindly bodies and are roughly in the 5 to 6 feet tall range with very grey skin, and they are distinguished from certain creatures who we suspect are semi-android, semi-biological, who are much shorter, 3 to 4 feet, and grey with a large head and dark eyes. So these were the tall greys, and they spoke with this young man telepathically, and he quite rightly was terrified, but he did manage to get the courage up to pose a very, very interesting question, a very obvious question, but nonetheless to have the courage at 8 or 9 years old, meeting a creature that definitely is so unfamiliar and being in an unfamiliar surrounding. And he asked him, "Where do you come from and why are you here?" And he got a very succinct but nonetheless concentrated reply, which was that we have come here to you now because we are from your future and we want to see your body before the technology is put in your body. Now, without getting into the realm of implants, which are a reality in our society, in Sweden people do have implants in their hands to do bank payments and to get on the tube and the buses and all sorts of things. But there's also the technology, as in chemical technology, the fluoride in the water, which is utter poison, the poison that's put in our food, Coca-Cola with aspartame. Aspartame is well known as a cancer-causing chemical, and yet it's in Coca-Cola and I don't know how many other fizzy drinks. Then we have the mRNA vaccine and the excess deaths and the blood clots, and I have to take my hat off to Dr. John Campbell, who has done absolutely fantastic work and has federated other professionals and has a champion in our Member of Parliament, Andrew Bridgen, who's a very brave gentleman indeed, given that the entire Parliament, virtually, give or take 1 or 2 members, are totally indifferent. Um, and the other poisons we have in our body, for example, Roundup, which is a glycophosphate utter total poison. It's so bad that even golf courses ban it. It had been banned by the FDA previously, not to be used on any agricultural produce or agricultural land, and they've gone back on this and are now allowing crops to be sprayed with this stuff, which is essentially just a weed killer, and it is absolute poison. So when we talk about technology in our bodies, we're not just talking about implants, we're talking about all these terrible chemicals. And then we have chemtrails. So chemtrails in the atmosphere then becomes saturated, it turns to rain, and various other forms of precipitation. It goes into the water supply, and therefore the food chain, and we end up drinking it. So, and then we have in this country a big scandal about the sewage treatment, which isn't being done properly, and yet the shareholders are all getting nice big comfy dividends. So something's definitely rotten in the state of Denmark on that score. So when this tall grey says we want to see humans before the technology gets into your bodies, he's not just talking about dinky little microchips. He's talking about the rubbish that's currently being injected into our system. I must say I'm very grateful I didn't take the jab, and I'm very grateful that at the time all this blew up I was in Bulgaria and they didn't take it too seriously either. And I think that's one of the reasons why I escaped being jabbed. So, what has this got to do with our origins? Well, that's a very good question, because I think we can assume, without presuming too much, that X thousands or hundreds of thousands of years ago, the problem was simply finding something to eat and eating it safely and making sure there was enough to go around prior to becoming an agricultural and agrarian organized society. So whether you were eating berries or whether you managed to catch a wild goat or something bigger or a horse or whatever, so you had to then kill it and then you had to eat it. So the good thing was at least that none of the berries or the animals had been exposed, as far as we are aware, to any chemicals whatsoever. Now, I've put in the description a very sad story, but has so many interesting, as well as allegorical content, but very, very interesting scientific content as well, because this is a very sad story, but it's not unique, and it does explain to what extent our DNA is fluctuable. Now, you may be of the age where you had to take an 11 plus exam or an equivalent of, whereby roughly at just over the age of 11 you took a test which is totally culturally orientated and did not test your capacity to reason, but more see how well you absorbed whatever you were being fed. And this would determine roughly how you were streamed in the school system. And it's based on the fact that there's no evolution and no change. Now, in the link in the description, I have put Dr. Bruce Lipton, who has proved conclusively that DNA is completely variable. Nothing is fixed. And what's more, that DNA is not only the hardware, it's also software. And that this is stimulated by all sorts of factors, light being a very good example. So clouding us out is not healthy at all. Then there's diet, then there's your psychological condition, and then there are other factors as well, exercise and mental activity, emotional state. So basically your DNA is something that is elastic, and it can expand or contract. You want it to expand. So I have put 3 different accounts in the description of a historical case, and whilst there are records, they're not complete by any means, and whilst scientific studies have been conducted, those aren't complete by any means, because the physical evidence wasn't always present. But we do have certain elements. So this is the story of a Neanderthal lady who was discovered in the mountainous part of a small part of Georgia, part of the Russian Federation, in 1850. And she was very hairy and very strong, and they managed to capture her. She was obviously she was either a teenager or in her 20s. She was quite young. And the hunters took her back to town and sold her to a trader, who then put her in a cage for 3 years on exhibition, where people came to ogle at her. And she was fed, obviously. She had to dig a hole in her cage to make a bed for herself. And finally, after 3 years, either because of diminishing marginal returns or because the people looking after her said she can't take it anymore, the trader took her to a village and got the people to adopt her in a certain sense. I don't know whether any money changed hands at that stage. Anyway, she never picked up the language, but she did integrate into the village. She never wore clothes, and she was very strong and therefore very useful. So she was a near, like 3/4 of a citizen during the Tsarist regime. And they did, in their peculiar way, look after her. She had her own dwelling. She obviously had all her needs taken care of. She still didn't wear clothes, and she still didn't pick up the language. And she did participate in the daily life, the harvests, and of this agricultural agrarian community. And she could carry a very large 80-kilo sack of flour several miles with just one hand. That's how strong she was. But she wasn't at all aggressive. And they found out that she quite liked a drink, and sadly the men abused of her, and she had at least 6 children that we know of. Now the first 2 died because once she'd given birth to them, she lovingly took them down to the freezing river and washed them. And of course, the children, being at least half human, didn't have the thick hair and therefore died of hypothermia. So the future children, the village had a meeting, said, right, future children, if she has them, will be given up to certain families who will look after them, which is exactly what happened. Her children integrated into the Russian families and were brought up as Russians. They learnt to read, write and speak. They didn't have a language problem. They were not as hairy as their mother by a long shot. And they had children of their own, and we have photographs of her children. Apparently, the skull of one of her sons was exhumed, but we're not quite sure if it really was her son, because his skull is too human. It's like 100% human, and she definitely wasn't. Now, we don't have reliable photographs of her, but we do have quite a few etchings, but we do have photographs of her children. Now, she died around about 1890, and we do have the emplacement of the son's grave. We don't have the emplacement of all the other children's graves, but it's highly probable that her great-grandchildren are still in the area. So it would be very interesting if a DNA survey was done over X mile radius of the village where she was, and that parish records and then the Soviet records were traced to see if, excuse me, she could be, her ancestors, sorry, her descendants could be traced. Now, the reason I find this very interesting when talking about our origins is that if she was a Neanderthal, it didn't reject human DNA. There was a marriage. So when we look at genetic intervention from third parties, are they using a bank of DNA from other places? Are they harvesting DNA on planet Earth from other hominid creatures and then with their technology assisting the bonding and the fact that it actually, the mayonnaise actually comes together? And the reason I pose these questions is because when we look back in the Sumerian records and the Egyptian records, they have absolutely fantastic surgical procedures. Now, people will say, oh, they didn't have anesthetic. No, all of this was done under hypnosis. So if they had to amputate, you wouldn't feel it because you were under hypnosis. And often in antiquity, women who were having difficult births or breech birth or a cesarean would once again be put under hypnosis. Now, these interventions are very, I mean, certain cataract operations, as described by the Egyptians, are performed in exactly the same way today. Now, the one thing they didn't have was malaria. Now, animals get malaria as well. So when we say that it was reptilians who were the people who put various types of DNA together, and so we are the missing link. There is no missing link, we are it. The people who did that were theoretically reptilians to begin with. There may have been other races who came along and also may have tweaked us along the way. This is also very interesting because in the time of the ancient Greeks, they already knew that India was the most populous place on Earth and not China. But China wasn't a united country, nor was India at the time, but India was known as the most populous. So one wonders if India actually got started before the rest of certain continents, for them to have such a head start on the population. Now, the thing about this is that it raises so many questions. The one thing is absolutely certain, is that if you look at the forbidden books of the Bible, such as the Book of Enoch and all sorts of other very interesting books, the Book of Eve is quite fascinating. You see that there is definitely some form of genetic intervention going on. And then you have the notion of the Nephilim and the Watchers and all sorts of other things going on. And certain hybrids being created who have to be slain and literally knocked out because they're cannibals and they're just going to eat as many humans as they can. So we do have the elongated skulls with double jaws. In fact, there's a museum, I think I've already mentioned it, in South America with over 42 elongated skulls. We also have a whole battery of giants being found in Europe and the Middle East, and museums have these, and there are all sorts of newspaper reports on this as well, and I will continue to broadcast these as I continue my research. I actually have a whole load of stuff that I have to get hold of and bring it back here, and then once I have that, then I can have longer descriptions, but I do put as much in the description so that when I speak to you here, you will understand where I'm coming from and the questions that I pose. Now, the interesting thing about this is also, this is not an isolated case. Back in the 60s and early 70s, Canadian archaeologists were sent to a very remote part of Canada. Now, Canada is absolutely huge, second largest country in the world, and it has a tiny, tiny population. And there are vast swathes of Canada that have never seen a human being, or maybe once 100 years ago, and that's about it. I myself have been to parts of Canada where the birds and all sorts of other animals aren't at all scared of humans because they've never seen one, so they're quite curious. The deer definitely aren't, nor are the moose. And no, I didn't see any wolves or bears, but no, we did see some wolves, but they just weren't phased at all. So anyway, these archaeologists went up to some very remote part of Canada, and they were tasked to find Neanderthal tools, and that was the mission. So they had a little base camp with a little perimeter fence, and then they'd go off and to where they thought was likely that they may find these relics. Well, surprisingly enough, they did, and they were in mint condition, and to be quite honest, given that they weren't beneath X layers of earth or dust, they were obviously quite surprised to find such obvious implements in such good condition in plain sight. And without really posing any questions, or not too many, they were thrilled to pieces. They picked them all up, catalogued them, took photos of the tools in situ and all the rest of it, made records, did all their little stuff, and then they packed them all up and went back to base camp all happy with themselves. So they have a radio. They report in, oh yes, we've got the tools, so head office or whoever sent them says, well, we'll come and pick you up tomorrow in the afternoon or something along those lines. And they say fine, they're all happy, they're going home. These aren't archaeologists like Indiana Jones. These are guys who are very nice but wouldn't pass any military physical exam. The next day, they're going about their business, and at the fence there are these Neanderthal creatures, and they're very peaceful, very kind, but they're there for a reason. So they work out quite quickly that without sign language and without even trying to talk to them, that it's the tools, that they've come back for their tools which have been purloined. And they're very gentle about it. They don't rattle the fence, they don't scream and shout and get all angry. The archaeologists give them back their tools, and off they go, and that's it. No one thinks to take a photo, no one thinks to record the incident, or even try and introduce the notion of trade or barter, and see if something can't be arranged. So they keep a couple of relics and also have an interaction with these, what appeared to be Neanderthal-like creatures. So anyway, they report this on the radio and say, well, we've given them back their tools and they've gone off happy, and it's without incident. So head office says, oh, that's fine. Plane will pick you up, or the helicopter, or whatever it was. It was an airlift of some description. And they go back to head office, where instead of being debriefed in the office, they get taken to a psychiatric facility where they are debriefed, and they go over and over the story several times. And slowly, over a period of days, it is made clear to them that if they want to leave this facility, they have to retract their account of events. Now, I don't know how that forwards science in any way, nor do I understand how this suppression of information could be of any use to anybody. And it would be quite fascinating for everybody to be able to interact with our ancestors. For instance, given these two very interesting incidents that I'm relating, one thing comes out very clearly is that despite their physical strength, they were very social people. And when you look at their burial rites and the care and gentleness with which Neanderthals buried their dead, with their little treasures and even a bouquet of flowers and various other things, and the position in which they are placed when they are buried, Neanderthal is far from being a hooligan. So I think we, the public, are actually very, very interested in the truth, and I think we have a right to know. Now, it doesn't bother me if there are Neanderthals wandering around Canada or Russia or anywhere else. I would actually love to meet them, and I'd love to see what they eat, and I'd like to try to eat what they ate. It would be very interesting. I would also love to be able to trade with them or play games and see also what sort of artwork they do and watch them make some of their tools. And it would be absolutely fascinating, and I would love to show them nice little tricks like a lighter to light a fire and generally have a good laugh with this, nice. So anyway, what has this got to do with our origins? Well, basically, Denisovans and Neanderthals are the last in the line of the humanoids that are bipedal, that stand up, and then there's nothing more in evolution until you get to humans. So we are the missing link. Now, it's very, very interesting that an ET would make contact with a young man of 8 or 9 years old, approximately 30 odd years ago, and say, we are from your future and we want to see your body before technology gets into it. So there is definitely, ET has an interest in us, in our DNA, and it's not just for us. I'm sure they have their own reasons as well if they are from our future. So on that, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I'm fascinated by the subject, and I hear a lot about the Intergalactic Federation. Now, I think I may have mentioned this before, but I will reiterate this. There are several intergalactic federations, and they're not all Pollyanna, everything is lovely, everything is pretty, and it's all Star Trek. Okay? Star Trek technology, according to Ben Ridge, who was head of Skunk Works at Lockheed, they already have, and have had it since the 70s and 80s. Right? They have the replicators and the transporters and all sorts of other stuff. They've got this. In fact, anti-gravity, according to Dr. Stephen Greer, we've had since October 1954, where it was actually created by the Americans, having reversed engineered crashed ET craft. And yes, we have had at least 80 crashed retrievals, and yes, we have been in contact with several ET civilizations since before the Second World War, since the 1930s. And not just the Americans, but the Italians and the Nazis. So, on this, our origins, yes, we have to definitely continue the search. It will be very useful for our future, but for our future, let's keep our bodies as clean as possible and as free as possible from all these chemical agents. And as for galactic federations, let us be as demanding and as exigent and as choosy with these groups, as we are when we choose our own friends, and as we are when we choose our own news networks, and the authors we read, and those we like and those we don't. And we are going to have to become far more selective and less impressed with the technology, and far more impressed by where is this going and how is this going to be a win-win situation for everybody. And on that, I would ask you please to support my channel. Like, share, subscribe please. And there is also a link to my PayPal account. I have expenses, and I don't expect to make a profit, but any donation, no matter how large or small, will be greatly appreciated and will be used properly. Now I am learning how to edit videos, and I am going to try and put up a background, and I sincerely hope you like the background, and if you don't, please let me know. I can always change it. Thank you very much for your time. I hope to be with you again later on today, and I look forward to your comments. Please do let me know what you think, and please do let me know your questions. I often take things for granted because this has been my hobby for at least 30 years, and I'm sure I take things for granted and forget that some people are completely new, and it's a wonderful position to be in. It's far more constructive to say, I know that I don't know, rather than thinking that you do. And this subject is full of surprises, believe you me, which is why I love it. Thank you very much for your time. Bye-bye.